All right, we'll give it a minute here. I see some folks hopping in. We'll give it just a minute or two. If you want, kind of throw where you're from in the chat. Definitely don't be shy here. And we'll give it like one more minute here, let some folks trickle in. So say hello, throw where you're from in the chat if you can. We're excited to have you guys here. And we'll get started in just a second. Hopefully everyone had a great Memorial Day weekend. Hasn't had too much trouble adjusting back. We'll give it just one more minute here. Let folks trickle in. Definitely don't be shy in the chat as you have questions or anything comes up as we're presenting to. Definitely throw it in there and our team will get to you, and I'll be able to answer things as we go along as well. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here in the interest of time. There's a lot to go through. I'm excited to see you all here. As we were putting this webinar together, I was curious, if this was going to be a topic that was interesting to people. I know sentiment analysis is a little bit more technical, a little bit more data focused. And so I was excited to see, kind of the interest around this topic and folks signing up here. So I'm glad you're all here. Sentiment analysis and, managing your online reputation is something we're really passionate about here at RentGrata. So excited to see that that is shared with a lot of the folks here. And excited to just kind of go through things today and hopefully give you a better understanding of what sentiment analysis is and how you can really use it in your day-to-day operations. So I'll start with a little introduction. My name is Eva. I sit on the marketing team here at RentGrata, and while I am new to multifamily and new to RentGrata, I am not new to marketing. I've helped many, many tech companies of all different sizes scale their marketing programs. So that's kind of the lens through which I'm approaching a lot of this today, is like how can sentiment analysis really transform our marketing, and help us better manage that online reputation. So a quick overview of what we're going to cover today. We're going to start with an introduction to what sentiment analysis actually is, go into a little bit about natural language processing and sort of how sentiment analysis works, the nitty-gritty, so that you understand things there. Then we'll go into why it matters for multifamily, so how major multifamily companies are using it today in their operations, how your team can leverage it. And then actually talk a little bit about implementing sentiment analysis, and kind of the steps there that your team can take to actually start using this, really quickly in your day-to-day, with some of the tools you may already be using. We'll go into turning insight into action. Really the goal of sentiment analysis and sort of data processing is how can we take these insights and incorporate them into our business and make better decisions here. So we'll spend some time kind of talking through the ways that folks are doing that. And I'll leave you with some key takeaways in addition to, sort of a guide on how to start implementing sentiment analysis. So don't worry about taking notes. You'll get the recording. We'll actually send you a guide with some steps on how to implement things, for you to really get started. All right. So before we get into sentiment analysis, we have to talk a little bit about the digital reputation landscape, which I'm sure is something that's on everybody's radar. It feels like we can't escape it these days. And we know that it's a really, really important part of the rental journey today. 75% of renters actually check out a community's online reviews before ever making contact. So more now than ever, it's important that we have a really good, sort of grasp on what this reputation is, how people are going through this search process. And we know that they're going to use these online reviews as part of that journey. We also know that it has a huge impact on occupancy and rental premiums. So 64% of people said they're willing to pay more for a highly ranked or reviewed property. So these reviews actually have a huge impact on our bottom line and our ability to price and sort of be competitive in the market. And so really understanding, what folks are saying about our communities, can actually impact how we price and sort of, what the bottom line is. And we know that negative review management is super, super important. If you've ever had a negative review bomb drop, you know that sort of getting out ahead of it, responding to it is really, really important because 70% of renters filter for and read these negative reviews during their search. So these folks are actually looking for, what that negative sentiment is, what folks are saying negatively. And so having a really good process in place to respond to that is super important. A negative review can dramatically sort of derail someone's journey. That will stick with people, often more than the positive reviews that are left. So having a process in place to respond to that quickly, to get out ahead of it, and actually prevent those negative reviews from occurring is super important and can help us move more folks through the funnel, kind of get them into these communities and get those leases signed. And we know that, not kind of addressing your online reputation could be costing you. Kind of like we said, rent premiums can be higher for folks with really strong online reviews. Properties with 4 or more stars can actually see anywhere from 5 to 15% higher rent premiums compared to properties with lower ratings. So this has a huge impact on how we're pricing, our competitiveness in the market, and our ability to sort of grow NOI and the bottom line. Again, reduced vacancy costs with a really strong online reputation. We can move people through the lease process faster. We can spend less on marketing. We're actually probably not losing as many prospects, but kind of having a negative online presence can really impact these things. And again, retention through proactive problem solving, identifying these areas where we have some negative sentiment early helps prevent those move outs in the first place. There's less communities, with units sitting open, and we're avoiding those review bombs from ever dropping. Having processes to respond to them is great, but if we can actually get out ahead and prevent those experiences that are leading to those negative reviews, we can really see the impact on our communities and help our teams kind of fix these things early on. But there are some challenges, kind of figuring out how we're going to manage this online reputation, especially when it's scattered across so many places, can be really challenging. There's a volume problem. We're looking at feedback. We're looking at these reviews across so many different platforms: Google, Yelp, apartment ratings, Facebook. So just having your team be able to monitor all these different places and sort of respond to these reviews is a huge challenge. And there's time constraints here. Your teams are super, super busy. They're already at capacity in terms of their workload and their sort of day-to-day work. And now they're stuck with this burden of manual review monitoring, which is like yet another check item that they have to go through, and is taking valuable time away from them being able to sort of make changes, implement changes, really, help people through the leasing process, and ultimately provide a smoother process from start to finish. A lot of times we're seeing folks have inconsistent response strategies too. It's difficult to standardize, how we're going to respond to these different reviews when they're happening in so many fragmented places. Each community might have a slightly different, response protocol here. And so creating these really consistent processes across all the different platforms and communities that we work with, is often something we see companies struggle with. And again, there are untapped insights in here. We have all of these reviews, scattered across different places, maybe survey data, the online reviews. And so how can we actually extract the insights that we need from this unstructured feedback data? Often there's really, really valuable nuggets of information in there that teams just don't have the time to kind of go in and find themselves when they're manually filtering through all this information. So that's where sentiment analysis comes in. At its core, it's really a way to interpret a super large data set, all these reviews living across these different platforms, your survey data, your maintenance requests. You have this huge, really rich data set, and sentiment analysis helps us interpret that data and tell us whether people are saying positive, negative, or neutral things about your communities or services. And you're probably wondering, okay, how does it do that? we have to briefly talk about natural language processing, which is essentially teaching computers to understand human language the way that we do. So think about natural language processing as the brain. We're training the computer to kind of read through all of this data and actually figure out, is this positive? Is this negative? What are the sort of words and phrases here that I need to be able to read to pull out the sentiment behind these emails, these reviews, these survey answers? And it'll be able to tell us whether people are happy, frustrated, or something in between, maybe neutral on this topic. And sentiment analysis, kind of when we get into the algorithm itself, is the task that we're asking the brain to perform here. So the natural language processing, we've kind of taught the brain, some basic parameters here. And now with sentiment analysis, we're giving it a very specific task and we're saying, scan through all of this text and specifically pull out and categorize phrases that indicate emotion or opinion. So words like broken and unresponsive, delay, things that we know, kind of correspond to negative sentiment. The computer can help us at scale, across hundreds or thousands of messages, emails, reviews, actually put these things into categories and say, we know that these are negative words. This falls in a negative category. While things that we know are more positively, associated, things like clean, helpful, recommend, suggest a much more positive sentiment. And these algorithms can process all types of different data. So resident reviews, your social media mentions and comments, maintenance requests and internal communications that you have with residents and prospects, all of those surveys and feedback forms that you're collecting, and the lease inquiry communication. So it can ingest a really wide variety of data to help us start to categorize, these big themes and categories. And then identify whether your renters and prospects have positive sentiment, negative, or neutral, related to these key topics. So it might help to, kind of talking high level, about AI. It's probably easier to give an actual example. So let's say that you receive an email that says something like, I submitted a work order 3 weeks ago about this leaky faucet. I still haven't heard back. This is really frustrating and unprofessional. The sentiment analysis algorithm actually goes in, finds those negative words like leaky, haven't heard back, frustrating, and can even go a step beyond that to pull out kind of more advanced patterns around time complaints. It can say, okay, 3 weeks, that's actually a significant amount of time here. Still haven't, that sort of alludes to the fact that this has not been addressed yet. And understand the overall context and help bucket this, into a key category for us. So something like delayed maintenance response. And kind of it takes all of that data, pulls out those keywords, kind of buckets it into a key category, and then actually outputs that this is a negative sentiment. And it can say that with really high confidence, kind of based on all of these categories and layers that it's gone through and identified the sort of negative phrases and connotations. And this is going to help us really quickly prioritize where our teams need to be spending time. This, kind of at scale can help us prioritize the messages that we know we need to get back to right away. These are sort of urgent or like really reputation damaging things that we know our team needs to prioritize and get to really quickly. And it can do this across hundreds and even thousands of messages. So really helping our teams work more efficiently, kind of figure out, not just the star rating, but go beyond that to the why here. And so you probably, hopefully have some buy-in to AI and the value of some of these models for sort of filtering and sorting data. But you might wonder why it actually matters for multifamily. And again, this is a way for us to take this huge data set and those star ratings that often we get so caught up in and reveal the why behind them. So now we're not just sort of responding to these negative reviews as they happen, but we're understanding why either negative or positive reviews are being left. And that's helping us leverage the positive things, to really streamline our leasing process, to make our marketing really effective, and get out ahead of the negative sentiment areas way before they ever lead to that negative review bomb. And there's a couple big areas here. Sentiment analysis can really help us identify our competitive advantage. It can pull out those unique strengths and weaknesses across many communities, across many different geographic areas, and identify the things that we want to be really highlighting, kind of during the leasing process and in our marketing, and the things that we know we need to respond to really early on to get somebody through that funnel. Again, it also helps us spot emerging trends before they impact the business. If we know that there are delays in maintenance response times, or there are amenities that folks are struggling with. We want to know that well before it ever leads to someone leaving a review online. And sentiment analysis can help us identify those things super early on, and get out ahead of it. And again, it's a way for us to make better data-driven decisions for capital improvements. If we're figuring out, how to spend our money, what is going to have the biggest impact, on keeping these units full, on, lease renewals, sentiment analysis can guide us there a lot faster than sort of manually reading through all of this data, the surveys, the reviews, and having our team try to interpret and figure out where to be spending their time and money. Again, there are some huge operational benefits to multifamily, detecting those maintenance issues way before they escalate, actually identifying training opportunities for our staff. If there are communities where our staff is really being praised, there's super positive sentiment around our staff interactions. How can we dig into that, figure out what's working, and actually bring that to other communities, and kind of train them in the ways that the staff is engaging with residents. Again, it helps us prioritize improvements. We know, maybe there's a long list of things that we want to be able to kind of improve in these communities. Now we can say, these things have the biggest positive impact on resident sentiment or the biggest negative impact. And that actually helps us quickly prioritize where we are spending our time and money on operational improvements. And again, it helps us not just kind of prioritize those things, but actually measure the impact of those improvements and policy changes. Now we can really quickly see, did this training work? Is the overall sentiment for our staff at this community going up? Or maybe did this policy change lead to more positive renter sentiment? Or are we still seeing it stay at neutral? And that sort of implies that we need to go back in and maybe try a different approach there. And again, kind of the biggest area that I think sentiment analysis helps us in is marketing. Now we can refine our messaging to highlight the things that renters are really, really positively perceiving, which might be different than, sort of what our gut was saying, or, what we're assuming, we should be highlighting for this property. Renters may have a different viewpoint that we can really extract, kind of pull out the themes that they are really being pleased with, in each individual community, and bring that into our marketing, to help sell that to folks who are in the prospect stage. Again, this helps us get out ahead of any negative perceptions. Now our marketing can actually address some of the negative things that we know renters are maybe saying about the property, or things that they're perceiving less positively. We can respond to that super early on before someone ever ends up on a tour, or maybe even outreaches to us, to help get them over that hurdle very early on. And again, it's just helping us create more targeted content to really reach the right type of renter. Since now we know kind of, the ideal profile of someone, sort of what are the things that they're really resonating with and enjoying at this community. Now we can build really custom targeted content, and use our marketing dollars even more effectively and be really confident in the way that we're using our marketing spend. So hopefully you're sold on the value of sentiment analysis and some of the things it can do here, but you might be wondering, this is awesome. How do I actually start using this at my communities, and bring this to my team? There's a couple of key early steps that we really advise everybody to take. The first is setting up that analysis framework, really defining those key categories. What are the things, at your communities, what are those big buckets that you want to be able to monitor, kind of dig into sentiment around, understand what renters and prospects are saying. Things like amenities, staff, maintenance, value. This might be different on a community basis, but kind of defining those categories is a great place to start. From there, you can actually start setting some baselines. That'll give us a sense. We probably already know, or have an idea of kind of like what our really well-performing communities are, what our like less well-performing communities are. But now we have some really concrete baselines around, on a category by category basis, how each community is doing, and how they stack up against each other. Again, we can set custom alerts, and build some reports here that actually tell us when sentiment is changing. So now we have all these key categories, we have our baselines at each community. Now we can quickly see on a month-over-month basis, how things are shifting. Are our policies having an impact here? How is sentiment changing over time? Maybe a really, positively performing property all of a sudden is having a negative sentiment shift around a specific category. That kind of sounds the alarm bells, lets our team go in and dig into that, and hopefully address it before it has an impact on leases and turnover, and move outs for that community. And again, setting up these dashboards and reports around these key categories that help everyone on our kind of on the ground team understand this data and use it in their day-to-day operations, whether it's the property managers, it's the marketing team, the leasing team. Having those dashboards and starting to get folks comfortable with looking at and interpreting this data is a great place to start. So from there, once we have all these baselines set, we know the categories that we want to look at. Now we can actually look at implementing response protocols. So how do we start to set some of those standard operating procedures for these different scenarios? Maybe when there is either a surge in positive sentiment around something, how can we quickly get that into our marketing programs? Or if there's a negative surge around something, how can our team really quickly start to respond to that online, incorporate that into our marketing to address those things, and make sure that these folks are kind of hearing their concerns heard, and that we're responding to it in a really efficient way. Having some templates for our team too that address those specific categories now makes it easy. They kind of quickly understand, okay, what category does this fall into, and how can I respond to that with a template here? Will make their lives a lot easier, and they'll spend a little bit less time, kind of scrambling to respond to these things. They'll be able to pull from these templates that already exist, and that can help us just get out ahead of these things really, really quickly. Again, setting response time targets. Now we have all these categories, we can actually set some severity guidelines as well and say, okay, things that are really highly negative, we know that our team needs to respond to in 24 hours. So anything that's spit out with a highly negative sentiment is something that our team needs to jump on right away and make sure that we're using those templates to respond to. Whereas something that's a little more neutral or maybe slightly negative, we can kind of have a longer response time there. And that just helps our teams prioritize their time and make sure that they're spending their sort of day to day on the right things that have the biggest impact on the business. And again, kind of starting some training to get our staff really comfortable with this data, the key categories, kind of how we're tracking these things, and how to use that in their communication. So at every stage of the funnel here, when they're engaging with prospects and renters, how can they use this sentiment data to make that even more effective, make sure that we're responding to people in a really, kind of human way that addresses the concerns that they might have here. We see a huge impact on the business that way. So there's a lot of different tools out there that help multifamily companies actually implement this sentiment analysis. They stretch from everything from there's often built-in sentiment in your PMS. There's really kind of advanced tools like business intelligence tools like Microsoft Power BI and Tableau for teams who have maybe bigger sort of data scientists on hand, and bigger budgets. There's emerging AI solutions, and there's some sort of channel specific solutions. So if you just want to look at survey data or just look at social media tools, there's some solutions out there that exist for that. But there's a wide variety of tools here. Often, being channel specific then is kind of limiting us. And some of them do require, having data resources on hand and slightly more technical folks. So finding the right tool for your business can be a little bit complex. And kind of as we've worked with folks over time and dug into this, we've found that there are some limitations kind of around the existing solutions in the market. We're really passionate about, how can we make sentiment analysis as accessible as possible to your teams so that they can take these insights, incorporate it into their day-to-day, and you'll see a really meaningful impact on all of your key business metrics. But kind of some of the existing solutions and ways that folks are using sentiment analysis have limitations. One of the big ones is that there's often a lack of authenticity in survey data. The way that we write surveys, often we include leading questions. We kind of have an idea of the outcome that we're trying to get or the answer that we hope to have, and we'll write the questions to get that. So writing truly agnostic surveys is really challenging, and often those leading questions and the fact that we have to incentivize folks to actually fill out those surveys or leave us that feedback leads to slightly less authentic data. Again, if we're just looking at online reviews, those are really highly polarized. As I'm sure you know, folks often leave a review when they have an either super positive or super negative experience. And that isn't always an accurate reflection of sort of what your average renter at that community, feels about the property or community. And so in having these really highly polarized reviews often skews overall sentiment. We want to look at beyond just the folks who had a really, kind of bad or good experience at overall for this community, what are folks saying? What are they enjoying? What are they maybe struggling with to get a more accurate view of where we need to kind of spend our time. Often just having enough data to extract these insights can be challenging. If we are using surveys, we have to send them consistently over time. Rewriting the surveys, collecting that data, going through the incentive process really takes a lot of time and can also be expensive depending on what those incentives are if we're using a survey company. And it can also be difficult to make decisions off a few reviews. Many of the communities we work with only get a handful of Google or Yelp reviews per year. And being able to make decisions off of, a few reviews each year is really challenging. Also, a lot of the tools that exist are very technical. Big multifamily companies who have robust data teams, data scientists on hand can kind of leverage these more advanced tools. But many of the AI solutions that exist, aren't accessible to regular teams. We want, sort of property managers and leasing teams to be able to go in, ask very, kind of simple questions, and get these insights really easily without the need for engineers or kind of technical folks to help get them to those insights. So, kind of one way, we've started to address sentiment analysis in our own data is, I'll back up a little bit and just talk about kind of the data set that we've built and sort of how we're using sentiment analysis to extract insights there. What RentGrata does is actually facilitate conversations between prospects and renters that allows them to get a really accurate and authentic picture of what it's like to live there from somebody who's actually living in that community. And so what we've been able to do is help all of these different companies and communities connect their renters to prospects and have these really candid conversations and help us collect, thousands and thousands of messages, with questions from prospects, with answers from renters, and build this really interesting data set that we want to be able to sort of share insights from, with the companies that we work with. And while we can't share, the actual content of that conversation, we're not going to share those messages with you. We want that, to remain anonymous. What we wanted to be able to do was kind of give you access to the insights that live in those thousands and thousands of messages between renters and prospects. What are the questions they're asking? What are renters saying about specific amenities or services? All of that data in there, those themes, we wanted to be able to really easily, allow property management companies to access and then act on that data. So our solution was to build ARI, which is our own version of sentiment analysis. And what ARI does is analyze those millions of messages that have been exchanged between prospects and current residents, on this really unique data set, this really authentic data that we've been able to collect over time. And what we want to do is kind of illuminate all of those insights that live in those messages, share that with property management companies. And so we've trained our own AI model, leveraging the OpenAI API. And our team spent a lot of time developing and training this specifically for a multifamily use case, so that your team would be able to go in and ask really simple questions and kind of get to these insights in a really impactful way, so that you can use them in your day-to-day and even go a step further and do things like generate marketing materials, actually write emails, and really start leveraging this sentiment analysis in your day-to-day operations. So now your team can go in and ask a really simple question like, which amenities are residents most excited about? And what our sentiment analysis will do is actually go in, comb through all those messages, and pull out those big themes and trends to help your team then sort of make better decisions and highlight those things in marketing. And really, kind of at its core, the goal of sentiment analysis in general, whether you're using ARI or another solution out there, a channel solution, or even just the insights that exist in your PMS today, is we want to extract those insights and we want to turn that into action that our teams can take. So how do we actually start to act on these trends and themes that we've been able to extract? So making those operational improvements, things like staffing decisions, maintenance and capital improvements, even managing vendors, kind of seeing which contracts are justified with really positive sentiment. If people are saying really great things about the landscaping at these properties, that's maybe a way to justify those landscaping contracts, at those communities, and adjusting those policies across the board and measuring the impact of that. Again, kind of taking these insights, using it in our marketing and leasing strategy is super, super important. A lot of the folks who are, really leaning into their competitive advantage and doing well in multifamily are actually pulling these insights out, using them in their advertising and social media, reframing any negative topics, getting out way ahead, kind of before it leads to those review bombs, training our leasing teams on how to talk about the things, that we know are really positively perceived at this specific community, and then identifying that ideal resident persona. Who are we really targeting? Who is the right fit for this community, and how can we reach them with our marketing? Kind of knowing, the profile of someone who's very happy here. What are the amenities and services that they've had a really great experience with? And again, reputation recovery. So addressing those negative surges as soon as they happen, having really targeted responses to these things can help us turn somebody who maybe was having a negative experience, when our team can jump into action, kind of right away. They know this is something negative that they need to respond to quickly, and kind of have a really personalized response to that. All of a sudden, we can turn somebody who's having a negative experience into an advocate for our community, someone who says, wow, they really kind of heard what I was saying. They were able to respond in a really personalized way. And now all of a sudden I've had kind of a net positive experience here. And again, just measuring the initiatives that we are implementing, measuring kind of our marketing initiatives, our operational improvements, our amenities adjustments. Sentiment analysis makes it really easy to do that in a way that our teams can then kind of take the results and continue to make good decisions on. So a few key takeaways. I know we're almost at time here. Locking in that competitive advantage. This is something we're really urging a lot of our clients to do. The landscape is getting more and more competitive, in terms of rentals. And so being able to spot these issues, identify those really positively perceived amenities and services, and tracking sentiment changes over time can help you lean into your competitive advantage, attract the right people, and keep those units filled. Again, starting small, it can feel kind of overwhelming. Oh my gosh, I have all of this data. These AI tools can be kind of complex. Start small. Start with just the data that you have available today. Maybe you're sitting on a bunch of historical surveys that you haven't really used. You have a pretty robust group of Google reviews. Just start there and work on setting those benchmarks and creating action plans kind of specific to the data that you have today. And again, empowering your team. What we want to do here is give your team a really powerful toolkit to address these concerns so that they feel confident they can jump into action right away, have really personalized responses when things are happening on the ground, and improve the overall rental and experience in a way that drives that NOI. And what we'll do is we're going to share kind of with all of you after this an implementation checklist that goes into this in a little bit more detail, gives you a step-by-step process here, so that you can really start bringing this to your communities and seeing the impact really quickly. And so if I'll leave you with one kind of big theme here, the key to ROI is not just thinking about sentiment analysis as a monitoring tool, but using it as a strategic asset that actually informs our pricing, our operations, and our investment decisions. Kind of taking the insights from this data and giving your team the tools they need to act on that, is really the goal of sentiment analysis, and something that we're seeing a lot of leading multifamily companies have great success with. All right. I know we are just about at time here. That was a lot of information. If there are any really pressing questions, feel free to throw them out there. You can also leave some questions in the chat, and our team will get back to you. And we will share the recording and that implementation checklist. And I appreciate you all for being here. Thank you. All right. If there's no questions, I'll see you all soon. Thanks all.